So if you needed any evidence that Andor Season 2 has become a massive success, look no further than what has transpired in my household. Welcome to the show. It's a Star Wars show. I'm your host, John Justice, here to talk a little bit this week about how Andor Season 2 has potentially changed everything. I'll explain in just a moment. A character from the show may have big plans for the future. We'll get into that, plus your emails this week, your listener feedback. But as I mentioned on a previous episode, Andor Season 2 has brought the family back together watching Star Wars as a group, as opposed to typically where we're kind of segmented off depending on which piece of Star Wars content we're talking about. Now, I think that a lot of this has to do with the age of the family right now. I have a 22-year-old, soon-to-be 23-year-old son working his way to becoming a pilot, living here at home. I have an 18-year-old about ready to graduate from high school next week, so he's growing up. And then my wife and I have been longtime Star Wars fans, although she's become more of a casual Star Wars fan to my more hardcore Star Wars fandom. Andor's changed all that, though. She's absolutely loved the series, has actually said now that Andor, the character, has become her favorite character in Star Wars. And now we've been rewatching Season 1. And rewatching Star Wars is not something that my wife typically does. Unlike me, where I'm watching some type of Star Wars content every single week. And it speaks to the quality of the show. You don't need my wife's view of the show to know that this is a fantastic show. And the fact that even I was soft, as I've mentioned on Season 1, absolutely loved Season 2, went through watching Rogue One afterwards like so many people have done. It was the #1 streaming show on the Disney Plus app going back into last week and then rolling into A New Hope. Going back and watching Season 1 now, I've enjoyed more so than the 2 or 3 times that I've watched Season 1 in the past, knowing what's to come and really getting into these characters more. And even to a certain extent, appreciating the storytelling more so than before. I can be honest and say that in the past, I think my fandom of Star Wars and my expectation of Star Wars may have superseded my ability to enjoy the show. And now that I appreciate Andor for more of what it is, wherein prior to the release of the show, I wanted a series that was akin to Game of Thrones without all the explicit material in Star Wars. And maybe I didn't quite feel like, well, I didn't quite feel that on watching it the first time out that that's what we ended up getting, and now I do. But what this means moving forward is the big question that I have. Disney is incredibly reactionary. We know this from the response to directors and how other projects that they've been a part of have fared ahead of their going into production on certain Star Wars projects. Colin Trevorrow is probably the biggest example of that. We know that when they feel like the films aren't being produced the way that they had hoped, that they'll shift gears. Lord and Miller and Solo, certainly an example of that. Even when it comes to The Force Awakens and waiting for the script to come in, the screenplay writer, who was the writer for Little Miss Sunshine, initially was supposed to be drafting the script for The Force Awakens and was taking too long, and so J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan ended up taking over. But I think a better example would be in the way that the studio pivoted from what their planned projects were in the wake of the lack of success of Solo, which they interpreted was hurt because of what had happened with the controversy regarding The Last Jedi. So here we have this Andor Season 2 that, after a series of divisive shows, no films since the release of The Rise of Skywalker in 2019. Now you have this season 2, and I don't know exactly what the streaming numbers are, but I know within the fandom, almost universally, it's receiving praise, and for great reason. So I guess my question is to you, how does Disney end up responding to this? How does Lucasfilm respond to this? And how will this impact the future of storytelling? We already have several projects in the works. Will those projects see a change? Now, certainly that's not going to happen as we're 1 year out from the release of The Mandalorian and Grogu, but with the other planned projects, the Star Wars Starfighter project, Ryan Gosling at the helm of that, directed by Sean Levy. The Daisy Ridley-led post-Episode 9 film that we're allegedly supposed to be getting, and of course the Dawn of the Jedi film from James Mangold that we're supposed to be receiving. I'm really curious to see how Lucasfilm and Disney respond to this overwhelming success, at least in terms of the commentary, which is, you know, a better place than Disney has been in quite a long time. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. I don't know at this point in time. I don't know if they see this as an opportunity to do more adult-themed, doing that thing with my fingers around adult content, or if they look at new projects that perhaps have been shelved that maybe lean into what Andor did. Now, with that being said, I've been interested, and I've mentioned on the past couple of weeks' shows, that I would love to see a continuation of this team around Andor going into the original trilogy and running along parallel to the events that we see in A New Hope and perhaps, and The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Perhaps this is where we're heading with this story that I found when doing prep for today's show.
This is not going to go the way you think.
So Andor Season 2 playing out over the final 4 years of Cassian Andor's life, with the finale leading directly into the events of 2016's Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. And I could use some help on this, by the way, because the final episode for Andor takes place 1 BBY, so before the Battle of Yavin. So there's supposed to be roughly a year that transpires during the time period of that final episode, and having watched it a few times now, I failed to see how a year could have transpired in those events leading into Rogue One, knowing the time frame of Rogue One, and then knowing the time frame of going into Rogue One and the events that occur just over a relatively short period of time in A New Hope. So I don't know when that year gap took place, or if it's just a matter of, technically speaking, we're 1 year out from, we're within the year of the Battle of Yavin. Maybe that's the way that needs to be looked at, and not like we are 12 months away, but we're 1 year BBY, meaning we're in the year of BBY, and the events take place over the course of just a few weeks, as opposed to labeling the start of that episode with 6 months or 2 months from, or so many hours from, right? But if you have a better answer than that, I'd love to hear from you. Email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or if you're enjoying this up on YouTube, leave a comment there. So during that time, Cassian and Bix's friendship became a full-blown romance, reading from this article. Ultimately, Bix made the difficult decision to leave the man she loved so that he could fight for the rebellion unencumbered by his feelings for her. The final scene in the series revealed that she indeed had a child that Cassian will never get to meet. You know, Cassian, obviously, spoiler alert, dies alongside Jyn Erso on Scarif after stealing the Death Star plans. Now, how much Bix knows about Cassian's final fate, we're not aware, though we'd imagine she'd reach out to the Rebel Alliance to learn that he went out as a hero, helping to save the galaxy, and there's speculation that that final shot may have been her sensing through the Force that Cassian's journey was over. Now, according to Daniel Rickman, and he's been pretty well known to put out some credible news reports, there are rumblings that Lucasfilm does have more plans for Bix. It's unclear when or where she'll appear next, but the character's story may not be over. While theories do swirl that Poe Dameron could be her and Cassian's son, that runs the risk, the article says, of feeling incredibly convoluted and forced. Now, showrunner Tony Gilroy recently said this about the show's bitter ending. It does three things for me, says Gilroy. It does exactly what you said. I think it makes his sacrifice that much more bitter. I think that for anybody who had lingering doubts about Bix leaving in episode 9, it explains it for anybody who was hesitant about buying into that scene. And finally, ultimately, I was desperate to end on a hopeful note. The rebellions are built on hope. It isn't just a t-shirt, it's a legit flame that a lot of people need to see. So hopefully, I was ending on something that was upbeat, as it was important for me to do that. The actress who plays Bix has also discussed the conclusion of Bix's story, describing it as a hopeful moment, that she's where she wants to be, and she's hoping that Cassian is good and well, and that one day they will be reunited. Now, confirming that she's not been told anything about what became of Bix after Season 2 of Andor, the actress also expressed her willingness to reprise the role if asked. I tried to focus on what was happening with Bix in the moment, similar to how we deal with real life. You have hopes, you have dreams, and I'm sure that she hopes and dreams of one day reuniting with Cassian. I think that last scene that she's really hopeful about is the change that he's going to make. She's going to live in a better galaxy because Cassian is out there. Maybe, hopefully, a writer one day approaches me and they're like, hey, I know what happens, but I don't want to smudge it with my imagination. But I have so much hope for Bix and the baby that they're going to be fine, I hope. Now, moving forward, Lucasfilm appears to be focusing, as I mentioned, after the rise of Skywalker, meaning Cassian's child would be an adult. Bix, meanwhile, would be decades older when we last saw her in Andor. Now, she can always show up in The Mandalorian and Grogu or Ahsoka, of course, but it's hard to say whether this ending should really be expanded on. Regardless of what became of Bix and her child, there's also something to be said for leaving her story to be after Andor's powerful finale. Listen, they got a cast of characters that lived through Andor that I would love to see, Clea being one of them. To see her dealing with the rebellion, the difficulties that she faced having to go to Yavin, knowing how the people on Yavin did not have the appreciation of Luthen, and yet realizing there on Yavin, seeing what was taking place, that none of it would have been possible without the help of Luthen. I think there's a really compelling character and story that can be told there, and perhaps Bix can be along with that storytelling as well. I really do hope, going back to my initial question, that they do capitalize on this, and this is a great opportunity. And while typically I am a fan that wants to move forward in the timeline, I feel like we've spent a lot of time in these eras already because of what they were able to do with Andor and just how well it worked. To go through that original trilogy again, and I know it was a controversial comment for me to say that they should do a remake of A New Hope, be that as it may, this would be a great opportunity to do a bit of that. Looking back over the events of A New Hope and even giving us some glimpses into the battles that took place from a different perspective and with more modern filmmaking technology. I think this would be a spectacular idea, and if I were an executive at Lucasfilm, and assuming that you could get Tony Gilroy on board, or at least his son who helped in the writing process, I think that would be an absolutely fantastic idea. Again, especially given just how well received Andor Season 2 is.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, let's answer your emails this week. Listener feedback, talkshownerd@gmail.com. First, Joe, Joh2434, writes this. I had a similar idea after seeing Rogue One, a series showing from post-Yavin to the Battle of Jakku from the perspective of the pilots, the foot soldiers, the politicians of both sides in the style of Andor / the rebooted Battlestar Galactica. Yeah, and you got to imagine that those creatives at Lucasfilm have got to be looking at the opportunity of doing something like that. Andrew W. Collins, 8326, writes this. After watching Andor and Rogue One back-to-back, I followed up with A New Hope. After not watching A New Hope in the original trilogy for the first time in decades, A New Hope was almost unwatchable to me. Too slapstick and antiquated. The Andor treatment would be perfect. Interesting. There's no way I could ever know what that feels like because I just watch those films so often. And listen, there's a juxtaposition between watching Andor and going into A New Hope. There's no doubt about that. I mean, they're made decades upon decades, almost some 50 years apart. How do you avoid that? That being said, in my opinion, it really does speak to the quality that 1977 original Star Wars film is, because I still find it just abundantly adorable upon every single watch. And didn't feel there was any, I felt the follow through, knowing full well that these pieces of content were created so far removed from each other. Erwin J7 writes this. I agree with your title about redoing the original trilogy. If they redo the first trilogy, they should rewrite them as close as possible to the originals, but modernize the style with Tony Gilroy's writing and whomever the directors were. Lalo Corgan writes this. Poe Dameron, the son of Andor, please no. That's the Filoni/Favreau treatment of lore. Not everything has to be connected, and everyone must have a stellar future. If Andor series got something through, it's that anonymous efforts of random people, little acts of rebellion, even if unnoticed, are vital for pushing the rebellion forward. This goes back to my views on subjectivity. It's all subjective, right, when it comes to art. I like this idea. I consider it very much in sort of the same vein as telling the story of Andor in all of this. I mean, who would have thought that we would have gotten this much out of a character that was kind of the second star to Rogue One? I mean, Jyn Erso was the lead in that film, and Cassian Andor was the co-star in that film, but even when it was announced that Andor was getting a full series, I was kind of scratching my head going, really? Okay. And look at what it turned out to be. I'm not one that typically gets hung up on making the universe smaller. I think it would be an interesting origin story, even if they never touched it. But again, I understand the complaints and criticism of people that would think otherwise, like that comment did. And then lastly, friend of the show, Disney Desi, always great to hear from her. Per George, the comics are the only canon until the movie or TV shows undo it. The movies and the shows are the only legitimate canon. Comic canon can always be changed. I would have no problem with Poe being Bix's kid and Cassian's kid. Dameron could be the alias Bix takes up on Minna Rao. She needed fake documents, so it's possible that Dameron is her name on Minna Rao's paperwork, so she doesn't appear undocumented the next time the Empire or later the New Republic do their consensus. I also thought the way that K2SO was introduced was perfect, showing the brutality of the KX droids in the Gorman Massacre was more impactful story-wise than having a separate horror-type episode for K2, which I talked about at length on last week's episode of the original origin of Cassian and K2's meeting, but that they simply could not afford to go and shoot that particular episode, and so they made the changes. I also found out too that when you go back and watch season 1 and the Aldhani episodes, where the indigenous people on that planet come to watch the Eye, the spectacular light display. We're actually on that episode right now. That was supposed to be like thousands upon thousands of people, but they simply couldn't afford to shoot it that way. So through the storytelling, they ended up creating a scenario in which there were more people that were traveling to see this celestial event, but because the Empire had set up various way stations along the way to entice them to stay, many people fell off, And just a lot of people had left the planet because of the Empire's occupation. And again, the storytelling that comes about when you're given constraints in your budgets for these particular shows, as I mentioned last week, something that certainly took place in the making of the original Star Wars A New Hope, and also took place in having to pare down Andor from its originally proposed 5 seasons down to 2, and then trimming those down to what we ended up seeing with those 4 weekly 3-episode arc blocks that ended up working out so well. But what do you think? TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. As always, leave me a comment up onto YouTube. Like and subscribe on YouTube and whatever podcast platform you happen to be listening to and enjoying the show on. And before I let you go, I hope you'll take a moment and support my podcast and my commentary. I'm also, along with being a news talk show host, I'm an author. I wrote a 7-book science fiction space opera adventure series without an agenda. I titled it EMBARK. I wanted it to have a simple, straightforward name because it's all about adventure with these characters. I wrote it because of my love of Star Wars, my desire to know what it felt like to go and create a world and universe much in the same way that George Lucas did. I set mine on a future Earth 2172 to be specific, where you'll follow a protagonist and the girl he loves along with their ragtag crew on a journey of survival after having to escape an industrial accident on Earth. You have a post-apocalyptic science fiction space opera in book 1 that essentially morphs into a full-blown galactic space opera. Again, 7 books in all in the series, 2 trilogies tied in the middle with sort of a bridge book that is in itself a solo adventure, Gahan, Corbijn, and the Asteroid of Misfortune, but still ends up connecting the 2 trilogies of books 1, 2, and 3, and then 5, 6, and 7. I wrote this series for adults, but it is absolutely age appropriate for children 11 and older. Just think Star Wars in terms of the content, and not even nearly as extreme as what we got in Andor. The description for book 1 that I hope you'll pick up in your preferred format today goes as follows. Katha's father died 1 year ago. Yesterday, he gave her the key to saving humanity. She just doesn't know it yet. Deep inside D-Corp, the planet's largest civilian and military spacecraft factory, an industrial accident has set off a catastrophic chain of events. Unaware of the disaster, Taft Guardia eagerly agrees to help fellow pilot Katha Morrow investigate a cryptic message from her past. As war erupts, when D-Corp's ruthless leader attempts to exploit the chaos and seize control, Taft and Katha discover what may be the only hope of saving Earth's evacuees from annihilation, if they can survive the apocalypse first. Again, it's a fun and fast-paced, action-packed science fiction adventure. I hope you'll take a moment, check out my series on Amazon.com. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with science fiction. Available in hardcover, paperback, audiobook, free on Kindle Unlimited, and also ebook. Head on over to Amazon.com. You like science fiction, you love Star Wars. If you like your space opera to be epic, filled with romance, a lot of really cool technology, and unique action sequences, and no shortage of them, you'll love EMBARK. Go to Amazon.com and search for EMBARK and John Jon Justice and pick up your preferred book in the series in your preferred format today. I hope wherever you are, you're happy, you're healthy, and you're safe. God bless, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.